What's your sign, Arshad? We're talking about astrology.
Aries. Oh my God, that's intense.
Welcome to Chosen Family, Arshad.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are so happy to have you here. You've been bringing your documentary film, Abu, all over the world. You just flew in from Vancouver last night.
Yes.
How was that?
Fantastic. It's I just want to say this show is awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, I've been following you for the last few days, and the whole setup in Phi Center and Montreal, this is amazing, brilliant, and I'm really honored to be on your show, and I hope it does really well.
Do you know in which time zone you are right now?
Yeah, I'm in West Coast. Yeah, but I just want to address what you were just talking about earlier.
Yes,
which we're going to get into. Obviously, how could we not?
Because I'm not conflicted at all. I think that this is clear appropriation of pop culture and by the church.
Right.
And evangelicals are dangerous.
Yeah.
They must be stopped. And at the heart of it, they are white supremacists, and they are the same as they're no different in their ideology as ISIS or as Islamofascists. So I'm absolutely not confused about it. I categorically condemn this.
Yeah.
Well, this is my feeling walking past every Sunday night. I'm like, they look cool. They like have good branding, but like they elected DT, and they don't want someone like me to be able to get married or have the same rights as them in the States. I don't know about Quebec. I don't know about Canada.
They're the same everywhere, but in Quebec we have to be very, very grateful because we got out of the fangs of religion in the 60s with a quiet revolution. And I give the example of Quebec wherever I go in the world, where people are like, well, what do you do? There's a lack of spirituality. Corporate culture is taking over. I'm like, religion is a corporate culture of its own.
Itself, yeah.
It's a thug. It's a religious. This kind of dogmatic religion is the only reason you see that club and all that money and all that comedic guy stand-up show routine priests trying to rope people in is because in the last few years, so much money has been appropriated towards the churches.
Yeah.
Like George Bush, I believe he appropriated, increased the amount of money going to churches by 250% or something outrageous like that.
Yeah.
So when you put so much money into it, then obviously you're going to have the money because the churches know they're losing their power because of social media.
Yeah.
And because of plain common sense going around. But I tell you, we have to vehemently, with all our might, oppose this kind of appropriation of our culture.
So for people listening or watching who don't know you, who don't know why you're here, you're a phenomenal filmmaker. Your film Abu is a documentary that you launched this summer. Correct?
Yes, that's right. It world premiered in June.
And that you've been presenting in festivals all over the world, and it's about your relationship with your Abu.
Your father.
Yes, with my father.
And I feel like we're so excited to have you, and I feel like for our listeners to really get the most out of this experience, tell us about Abu, the film, in your own words.
Okay, so the thing is that I am from Pakistan. My family moved to Canada in 1991. And the biggest shock to me was the fact...
You were 15 or 16, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I was shocked that I was brown. I had no idea because, in Pakistan, we had one television station and we had so many different kind of shows. We had Chinese shows, we had Russian shows, American, British, Australian, of course, the Pakistani shows. So we were really conditioned to understand that there's all kinds of people in the world.
Right.
But when you come to Canada, everything is the same, and I did not find any representation of people of color, proper representation, besides like the Cosby Show,
Right.
And I realized that these people have no idea who we are, and that just got intensified. And then, there was Friends, but they were all white Friends. There was Sex and the City. It was like white Sex and the City. There was 90210, everyone white. So it was really a problem which you couldn't articulate, but you felt it as a young person. So then 9/11 happened, and that even started.
But you spent the 90s in Mississauga, right?
Yes.
Mostly that's how your experience of Canada was landing in Mississauga, living on a street.
True.
You had a Greek neighbor.
An Italian neighbor.
And the people in front of your house were Anglo-Canadian. They wouldn't look to you. Because I watched the document. It's phenomenal. People have to watch it. There's so many details of your experience in Canada, but also your experience with your family. Your father, your mother, your sister, your older sister, which you adore.
Yes.
Who you adore, sorry. And and all of those experiences combined together, and then you were leading up to 9/11, really affected your family personally.
That's right. And I wanted, so what happened is in 2011, I'm going to give away something about the film already. My father passed away. And I had a very difficult relationship with him as a gay son to a very devout Muslim father. So for his memorial, I was making a 5-minute video. But I realized that I have a huge body of obscene amount of home video and footage because my family were one of the first people in 1981 to get a VHS movie camera.
Which is amazing.
And I was like, this really little, and I'm like dancing, and I have so many videos of me dancing, you have no idea. I could like make a whole like series on just me dancing badly.
For our listeners, you have if you're okay. I was born in Quebec. I was raised in Quebec, and to see images of the early '80s in Pakistan and see happy people dancing, loving, is so contrary to all the images that we usually see from your culture.
That's right.
And that was so profoundly affecting to me to see that love and to see your family and to see you dancing and that freedom and your sister and because of that, those like home, I don't know, like here it's like, oh, whatever, you have a family video, it's like nobody cares. But like to see that text of your family, of you growing up and you in the late 80s also, because we really see you through your early adolescence and
that's right.
It's very touching. So you decided to like delve into that in 2011.
It was very, very difficult. Making this film was very hard. You know, one of the things you learn at film school, I went to Concordia, Mel Oppenheim School of Cinema, which I highly recommend, by the way, to anybody, because it's an excellent film school. And it's just an excellent place to go to university, in my opinion, Quebec. So I learned that, you know, you work with what you've got. You know, but I also learned that, you know, don't navel gaze too much. And then I made the ultimate navel gazing kind of film. But I made a very intentional film. You know, it's a very deep film. There's a lot I packed into the film. It's a very ambitious film. But I never actually meant to make a film about myself. I meant to make a film, you know, documentary about my father and how my family and what they're doing. But it was impossible to leave myself out of it. And it had to happen. And also it was very difficult, but I had to make the decision to use narration. And narration is really kind of looked down upon unless you're Werner Herzog, you know. But I had to, because I had to contextualize the film and I had to pack so many issues into one film, make sense of the whole thing, and also make it relatable and understandable across cultures.
Right.
Because the way you tell your story is, you know, the images are the images of your family, but then you, as you say, you narrate, you start from like a dream that you've had.
Animation, not
to give too much, but then really you explain your upbringing in Pakistan, the 90s, moving to Canada, 2001. There's a really phenomenal scene. It's an archive of you on the CBC. In 2003, talking about colonialism and imperialism.
Impending war in Iraq.
And it shows on the set that everybody's uncomfortable with you saying these things.
Yeah.
And it was way before, you know, like these things I feel are more common now, but like back in 2003 to have someone on TV being like, this is an imperialist war, we should not be doing this. Why did you channel all of this anger into activism and into like...
Well, that's what I try to explain in the film, you know, like what made my journey towards, what was my journey towards activism? It was about self-actualization, self-realization, about realizing that, you know, the hardest thing is to come out, you know, and then when you come out and you tell the truth to yourself and start telling the truth to others, then it just starts opening doors and the truth keeps coming out, you know, and then the more you learn, the more you grow, the more you realize what the world is all about. And which brings me back to that point of you earlier talking about religion and its implications and how religion is used to manipulate people and to get them to get involved in the righteous wars, the righteous their ways, us versus them, and creating this kind of the world where instead of thinking about the environment, about the planet, about global struggles, about poverty, we think about our own individual selves and get into this mode where we are willing to sacrifice ourselves or up, you know, kind of put militarism on a pedestal.
Right, exactly. What was your personal relationship like with religion? Because you mentioned that your father was devout Muslim. That's the culture that you grew up in.
Your Abu sort of wasn't like that when you were growing up. He wasn't.
Okay, he came to that later in his life.
That's right. So my film is actually really exposing what happens. Who are these migrants? Who are these immigrants? Who are refugees? It really shows you in a very personal way. It's a miracle that my film got made, first of all, because in our community, we do not like to share our personal videos or anything. We do not, like, even though now everybody has Facebook, but I tell you, there's like things that are just taboo. You do not talk about it. That's why you never see any representation. Right. But I was sick and tired of the lies, of the secrets, and of these very important issues not being discussed in our communities, in every community. You know, so I'm talking about very personal things such as sexual abuse, which is not easy for any person to talk about. But because my sister went there, that gave me courage to go there myself. So, you know, I'm bringing in, as I said, a lot of issues in the service of helping people understand that we may be fucked up, but we're just as fucked up as everybody else.
Right.
And we're not terrorists.
No, of course.
And in terms of that realization, like, everybody is fucked up, people have a very personal response to your film. We were talking a bit earlier before the show started. You've been able to bring your film to so many different places in the world and have these interactions with people that have seen your movie and have been moved by the film. What has that experience been like, that exchange between you and the people going to see your film? You know,
it's overwhelming. I get standing ovations. Just now I won Best Feature Award at a film festival in Vancouver.
In Vancouver, yes. Yeah. Congratulations.
It was shocking because, I mean, they gave the Best Documentary Award and I was like, okay, great. So Best Feature is going to go to a fiction, which is normally the case.
Right.
But the jury was so emotional. They all hugged me and people came out of the cinema, you know, crying and happy and telling me things. And constantly I hear, I wish I had brought my parents, or I wish I had brought my children. So the film is playing this Saturday at the Image+Nation Film Festival at 1 p.m. I really encourage people to come and bring their families so that they can, you know, they will get a very enriching experience. So people are coming and telling me how necessary this film is and how I've articulated their anguish. That's a great feeling.
Because Arshad, there's so many layers in your film. There's obviously the sexuality, being a queer man, and then there's immigration coming from Pakistan, and then there's imperialism, and just the sexism, also the relationship, sexual abuse, as you touched upon. But the way it's laid out and the storytelling is not. It's overwhelming at the end because you're like, wow, all of this, and then it ends with love, which is, I think, a good thing.
Well, the reason that you have been so moved by the film is not because of just my ability. Yeah. It is because I had an incredible editor, Etienne Gagnon. Yeah. He's a magician. Yeah. And I had a sound designer, Sylvain Bellamar, who just won an Oscar for Arrival.
Wow.
And I had a producing partner, Sergio Kirby. I mean, these and writing partners, Matt Jones, Shelley Tepperman, you know, and my narration was directed by Umar Majid and Deepa Mehta. So I had a team working with me. You know,
so that's my question. Because I heard the story where you were working for an airline and you saw Deepa Mehta, the famous Indian Canadian director, on the airline. Was that before you got into film? Well, you were a film fan, but before you got into film production.
1998.
What's that story?
I was doing a Delhi flight. You know, I was working as a flight attendant, which, by the way, is a job of privilege. I was in school. I was working as a flight attendant. I was living this really, really great life. And I had her. She was the only passenger in business class going to India, coming back from India, and no one on the flight knew her. I'm like, oh my God, that's Deepa Mehta. She made fire.
Because your parents, you grew up in Pakistan, but your parents were born in India.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, Both my parents were born in India, and they were refugees to Pakistan. So that's something also I contextualize and address without going too much into the politics of those countries.
But you have do you feel a sense of belonging with India?
Yes, of course. I mean, when you're in Pakistan, once again, I will mention Pakistan is just like Israel. There are two countries made at the exclusion of others. You know, one was Pakistan and one was Israel, and both are extremely dysfunctional nations because you cannot create a nation at the exclusion of other people. And this partition, this creation of this country was very brutal. And what it did is it put all the resources of the country into the hands of like 22 families who to this day still own everything, you know. So it's another very colonialist move, which divided families, divided lands, divided people, forced migration. Almost 2 million people died, and to this day that wound is existing. And now, of course, Pakistan, the most powerful the corporation in Pakistan is the military, which is the biggest employer in the country,
Right.
which really controls the country in almost every possible way. And Pakistanis are fed down their throat the hatred for India, but they are Indian. And when you come out of the country to a place like Canada, to a place like Quebec, where you meet Indians and you're like, oh my God, we're the same people, or you meet Iranians, or you meet Afghanis, or you meet these other people who you're meant to not like, or whatever, what have you, then you realize that people are all the same. And that's why Canada is so important. That's why Quebec is so important. That's why keeping church and state separate is so important. And so I cannot enough.
I love that you're saying this, because I feel like it's still touchy, because for me too, I'm just profoundly against these organizations and this manipulation.
Absolutely.
But it's hard to talk about, and that's why I appreciate your fearlessness in talking about it, because on some level, it's still something that certain people get something out of, but it's misguided, And I think that feeling of love or that feeling of community that some people experience within organized religion is something they can tap into outside of that just as much, if not in a more real way, personally.
But look at what the media is up to. The media is normalizing the crimes of people without instead of holding them accountable. George Bush was on Ellen.
Oh yeah, the rehabilitation of George Bush right now is
it's insane, and
yes.
it's frightening, and it's disgusting, and we cannot let it go on. We cannot let it happen, and that's why I'm very, very concerned. That's why I made this film, because I want a reminder to people, to let people know, first of all, who we are, where we're coming from. I did not make this film just for the Western audience. I wanted the Western audience to know who we are, but I want to remind our own people, look, we are about love. We're about compromise. We're about understanding. We're about joy. We are poets and artists. We are not terrorists.
And the way you show your father is very complex. So he's a man who was pretty moderate when you were growing up, and eventually when he moved to Canada, he had a hard time integrating economically, and he turned to religion.
That's right.
But in always a desire to have more love in his life. I found it in the film, and he's moved by poetry, and it's not a sort of image of radicalization that white people have, that we have, and I really like. But then and the way you turn to activism, it's both of you turn to something.
That's right.
And then in the end, that sort of tore you apart, but you had to come back together.
Yeah, that's the thing, this is life, right? Mm-hmm. And I have an image of my father, which I found only after the film was done, where we're literally in a boat together, and I use that image for some, publications and so on. But the fact is that we're all in the same boat, and we're all trying to find that elusive place called home.
Yeah.
And the film is really about a child and a parent, and trying to find that harmony between in a relationship in a society which is full of turmoil, full of things that are working to tear people apart rather than bring them together.
Right.
It's very touching to me also to hear you say nice things about Quebec.
I love Quebec.
Yeah. I mean
look at what Quebec has done for me. It has provided me the best education for the most affordable price. It has given me funding for my film from every level. Every festival here has embraced my film. The people, I found love here. I found community here. I love it.
Because it's an incredible journey from Islamabad to Mississauga.
And to Quebec.
To Quebec. Where do you live in Montreal?
Park X.
Oh, you live in Park X. Oh, wow. How is that?
Isn't that stereotypical?
Yeah. I mean,
excuse me.
Is it?
No, I'm just joking.
Okay.
It's a great place for artists. It's a great place for people of all different ethnic backgrounds, and I find that it's very inclusive. And I'm very engaged, and I was very excited with the recent election. Some very, very good people came forth, and I find it's a good community of activists and people.
How do you find the representation of South Asian Canadians and Canadian media, the Canadian experience?
It's very lacking, of course. I mean, and anybody can tell you that. Yeah. And the guardians, the guardians of culture at the higher levels are still white males or cis whites, and I feel like they still have no idea what we are struggling with.
Yeah.
And I think at the basis of that is the fact that they don't understand the privilege of a passport. what it means to need a visa. You know, if you're Pakistani, for example, or Indian, you cannot travel without a visa to Canada. And it's very hard to get the visa. You have to be a certain class of person.
Right.
As much as we harp on, democracy and freedom, these passports are remnants of colonialism. They prevent people from freely moving and experiencing the world. You know, so we still have a very divided global north and south, and these passports are chains that are inflicting the people of the global south. And they're the guardians of the gatekeepers of these big film festivals or big media. You know, they still do not have an understanding of the struggle of the global south.
Yeah.
Do you think now that there's a sort of fetishization of the global south or racialized people or in media and film?
I think that there are some strides that are being made. Like someone compared my film Abu with The Big Sick.
Okay.
That sounds like The Big Sick. And I'm like, oh, I never thought of it that way. But my film is, of course, very funny. It has a lot of comedic elements. It's also moving. But you know, there are these people like Kumail Nanjiani and like Aziz Ansari who are, you know, pushing the envelope, you know, and getting known, and that's very, very exciting. It is an exciting time. It's a good time opportunity.
Do you think the film will open doors for you outside of Montreal, Quebec, and in terms of filmmaking, in terms of opportunities, in terms of, because a film is really, when you're a filmmaker, is really how you get work. You meet other people. Right.
I am hoping that people will see the film and be moved by it. The CBC is presenting a 45-minute version of the film.
Oh, that's amazing.
And also the CT is Doc Channel, which I recommend everybody to subscribe to, is going to have the full version of the film sometime later next year, and I'm very excited about that. So people who have seen it are moved by it, and that's exciting. That's wonderful for me. And I think my film is not something that's going to making a huge splash on the scene, for example, but it's a slow burn.
Yeah.
And I think it's slowly but surely, from community to community, word of mouth.
Yeah.
But I love how, like, you're really at the intersection of, because we heard about the film through our friend Jordan Arsenault.
Yes, who's a wonderful, amazing human being.
Yes, yes.
Who's a queer activist, artist, curator, and he told us about you, and he told us about the film. But then I also, because I did a bit of research, and then, you know, in the South Asian community, people are, you know, reacting really well, not necessarily they could be straight, you know, like, so, and that intersection is not very common, and you're sort of standing on that intersection.
The strongest reactions are coming from people who are neither brown nor Muslim nor Pakistani, and they can be white, East Asian, African American, or African Canadian. The strongest reactions are coming from people across the board because they are so surprised, first of all, to see a film about people that they had very huge misconceptions about, as you correctly point out, Thomas. And that's really exciting for me. You know, and
there's a universal. Sorry, go for it.
There's exactly as you're saying. The film is going. We are very surprised by the reaction to the film, that people are just so moved by it, and they're breaking down and telling me very deep secrets about themselves, because even today people are not comfortable confronting sexual abuse or confronting, you know, a lot of secrets.
Right.
And I found out that 1 in 2 people is sexually abused out of South Asia. That's a shocking statistic.
Well, knowing what's going on with women in India, we hear a little bit about it, but it's so distorted what we hear, of what's going on there. We can end, Tranna, I know that you were, in the story, you were moved by getting the parents' parents' approval.
Well, that idea that need that we have to be understood by our parents, and what happens to us emotionally if we don't get that approval.
Yes.
You know, do you find that you were able to come to some sort of reconciliation, either with your father or just within yourself, putting this film together?
And even your mother, because
that's a really good question. Okay, that's very important, because they really, if you think about it, when I thought about it, because this film took a long time to make, the essence of it really was this acceptance by parents that is the hardest thing. And that is a very important thing for human beings. And when they don't get it, it's very challenging, especially for sensitive people, especially for artists, you know. And sometimes they struggle for this all their lives. The first time I had my Canadian premiere at Montreal at the Fantasia Film Festival, and my mother and my older brother and older sister from Pakistan were here in Montreal, and they refused to come to the screening. It threw me into a depression, you know, really, because my mother's participating in the film. I had a very difficult time with that. I like blocked all my family from social media.
Yeah.
I was very devastated, you know, because here I am. I worked so hard on making this film, you know, which is basically at its essence trying to justify my existence and the existence of people like myself. No one should have to make a film to do that. But then eventually my mother did come and see it in Toronto. It was opening film at the Real World Film Festival, which was a huge honor. It's a great screening, sold out a week in advance. I got a standing ovation again, and my mother saw it and she said, "Oh, it was kind of funny." And then she said, "Oh, it's not so bad," which in Ammi Pakistani terms means it's amazing. Fantastic. And then she said, later she said, "I'm proud of you." That was shocking. And I was like, "Huh? Say it again?" I was in shock. And that's something, that's something that she saw this movie. It was painful for her. I had Deepa Mehta on my right. I had my mother on my left. Deepa Mehta laughed throughout the film. My mother cried throughout the film. And of course, it was hard for my mother to see those scenes of my father dying. And, but, it was fantastic. It was a very moving and wonderful thing to hear that, okay, I have not been utterly useless in my...
No, quite the opposite.
Arshad, thank you so much. Anybody listening, you need to watch.
You need to see this film.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
It literally felt like 5 minutes. I can't believe we are wrapping up this interview. This is crazy. Thank you so much.
So much love and so much respect. Thank you,
Thank you for
Arshad.
having me on the show. It's a great show.
Awesome. Thanks.